When you wake up in the morning, there's a voice that sometimes greets you before you've even opened your eyes. It's quiet, but it carries weight. It reminds you of everything you didn't do yesterday. It questions whether you're good enough for the life you say you want. It tells you that maybe, just maybe, you've already missed your chance. Most people know this voice well. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and those whispers echo longer than anyone else's words. It's the voice of your inner critic, and when life feels uncertain, that voice tends to get louder. The Stoics believed that the mind, left unchecked, can become its own worst tyrant. And yet, they also believed that no tyrant is invincible if met with calm awareness. You see, your inner critic is not really your enemy. It's a reflection of your fear, your exhaustion, and your unmet expectations. It's the part of you that's terrified of failing again, so it attacks before anything even happens. It wears the disguise of logic. I'm just being realistic, it says, but what it really means is, I'm scared. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our opinions about things. When the inner critic speaks, it's not describing truth. It's revealing your opinions about yourself, opinions formed by comparison, by disappointment, by the times life did not unfold the way you hoped. To respond to it wisely, you must first learn to hear it without obeying it. There will be mornings when you feel as though the critic has already won, days when every effort feels pointless before it even begins. But this is where your power quietly lives, in your ability to pause. The critic wants urgency. It feeds on reaction. The Stoics practiced what they called prohairesis, the freedom to choose your response. So when your critic says, "You're behind," you can pause and remind yourself that no one can truly fall behind in their own journey. When it says, "You'll never be as good as them," you can ask, who is them, and why should I live by their story? This act of questioning transforms the noise into awareness. You stop being the attacked and become the observer. In that shift, you reclaim your peace. The truth is, your inner critic will never completely disappear. It's part of being human, our ancient brain, designed to keep us alert, now confused by the modern world. It tries to protect you by predicting danger where there is only discomfort. So instead of fighting it, learn to understand it. When it says, "You're not ready," translate it to mean, "I'm scared of what might happen." Then answer back gently, "That's okay." We can be scared and still move. This is what self-compassion looks like, not silencing the voice, but speaking to it with patience. You can be both the critic and the comforter, both the one who doubts and the one who continues anyway. Some of the greatest minds in history, the Stoics, the poets, the teachers, wrestled with their own inner critics too. Marcus Aurelius wrote entire pages of self-reminders to stay calm, to return to reason, to forgive himself for imperfection. He was an emperor, yet he knew that power meant nothing if he could not master his thoughts. In one entry he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You may not rule an empire, but you rule something far more intimate, the tone of your inner dialogue. Every moment you meet that voice with patience instead of panic, you are practicing a quiet form of mastery. There is something quietly revolutionary about learning to sit in silence with your own thoughts. Most of us spend our lives running from that stillness, reaching for distractions, noise, or validation to drown out the uncomfortable sound of our own inner voice. But the Stoics knew that silence was not the enemy. It was the training ground of the soul. When the critic begins to speak, you don't need to answer right away. You can let the words drift through you like passing weather, observing each cloud without judgment. In doing so, you begin to realize that thoughts lose their grip when you stop wrestling with them. A thought can only chain you if you keep pulling against it. And so, when your mind whispers, "You'll never be enough," try this. Pause and breathe. Name what's really happening. You are not failing. You are experiencing doubt. You are not weak. You are meeting a challenge. By naming it, you break the illusion that the voice has authority. It's just sound, just language, nothing more. The Stoics practiced this through negative visualization, imagining the loss or struggle before it arrived, not to suffer twice, but to remind themselves that they could survive anything. You too can use this awareness as armor. When the inner critic predicts failure, imagine that failure clearly. Then remind yourself, even if it happened, you would still be here. You would still be capable of rebuilding, learning, starting again. The critic loses power when you no longer fear its prophecy. There is also another truth the Stoics understood, one that is easily forgotten in our constant striving for self-improvement. You do not have to earn your worth. You were born with it. The purpose of reflection and philosophy is not to make you better in the eyes of the world, but to bring you closer to yourself, to remind you that the soul has value even when life looks messy. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his journals, he didn't do so to impress anyone. He wrote because he needed to remind himself of what he already knew, but often forgot, that calm is stronger than chaos, and gentleness is not weakness, but wisdom. So, when your inner critic says you're falling behind, remind yourself that the world's timelines are not your compass. Growth is not measured by speed, but by depth. You can move slowly and still move meaningfully. You can stumble and still be on the right path. Every setback, every moment of doubt, every long pause, they are not evidence of failure, but signs that you are alive and still learning. The Stoics believed that adversity was the truest classroom. The critic, in its own harsh way, can be a teacher too, showing you where your wounds are, pointing to the places that still need understanding. When you learn to listen with curiosity instead of condemnation, something shifts. You begin to hear the critic's voice fade into the background, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Your own reason, your own wisdom. You no longer speak to yourself as an adversary, but as a friend. And when you reach that place, when you can look in the mirror and say, "I am not perfect, but I am still worthy," the critic finally loses its throne. It becomes what it was always meant to be. Just another thought passing through the vast and steady landscape of your mind. When the noise inside your head feels too heavy to reason with, writing can become a form of quiet rebellion. The Stoics often wrote not to teach others, but to steady themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal the way one might speak to a trusted friend, patiently, honestly, without judgment. You can do the same. Each morning, take a few minutes to pour out your thoughts onto paper. Let your fears, complaints, and self-criticisms spill out. Don't try to fix them. Just look at them. When the words are outside of you, they lose their shadows. You begin to see patterns, the same phrases, the same worries, the same illusions, repeating again and again. Over time, this awareness becomes a kind of inner compass. You start to recognize the critic's familiar tone and learn not to mistake it for truth. Another simple practice is reframing. The Stoics believed that events themselves are neutral. It is our interpretation that makes them good or bad. When your critic says, "You failed," pause and reframe it. "I learned what doesn't work." When it says, "You embarrassed yourself," answer with, "I showed up when I could have hidden." Each reframe is a small act of freedom, proof that you can choose how to see your story. This doesn't mean pretending pain doesn't exist. It means refusing to give pain the final word. The Stoics knew that discipline of thought was not about denying emotion, but about guiding it. Feel the frustration, the shame, the disappointment. Then gently ask yourself, what can this teach me? The critic thrives in reaction, but loses power in reflection. You might also begin the habit of small, daily check-ins. At the end of each day, before sleep, ask 3 questions. What went well today? What challenged me? What can I carry forward tomorrow? These questions are soft, but sharp. They turn the critic's vague disapproval into specific understanding. Instead of, "I wasn't good enough today," you might realize, "I was tired, and I did what I could." Clarity is the critic's undoing. It depends on generalities. Never enough, always behind, nothing's working. But when you get specific, the spell breaks. You see reality for what it is. A series of small, honest moments, many of them imperfect, but none of them wasted. And finally, there is the practice of stillness, perhaps the hardest lesson of all, to sit, to breathe, and to watch the river of thought flow without jumping in. The Stoics called it the discipline of assent, the ability to notice a thought without agreeing to it. You don't need to stop the voice that says, "I can't do this." You only need to pause long enough to decide whether to believe it. If you can observe a thought, then you are already separate from it. The observer is stronger than the voice. With time, this distance becomes peace. You start to realize that the mind is not a battlefield to win, but a landscape to understand, and the critic is simply weather passing through. There will always be a part of you that wants to be further along than you are, a part that measures your progress against invisible timelines and asks, "Why not yet?" That part isn't cruel, it's just impatient. It believes that peace can only exist on the other side of achievement. But what the Stoics tried to teach was that peace is not a reward, it's a practice. You don't reach it by finishing the race, but by noticing your breath while you're still running. You can want growth, improvement, success, all the things that call you forward, and still treat yourself gently in the process. Ambition and kindness were never meant to be enemies. The inner critic only tries to convince you they are. Self-acceptance does not mean giving up on yourself. It means no longer fighting your humanity. It means understanding that some days will be heavy and others will be light, and both belong to the same story. It means realizing that rest is not weakness, that slowness is not failure, and that no one moves through life without seasons of doubt. Even Marcus Aurelius, in all his wisdom, wrote about waking up weary, about struggling to face his duties, about the fatigue of being human. But he also reminded himself, at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, "I have to go to work," as a human being. In those words lies a quiet mercy. You are not expected to be perfect, only present. There is a kind of beauty that appears when you stop rushing to fix yourself and start learning to understand yourself. When you can look at your reflection and see not a list of unfinished goals, but a person who has endured, adapted, and kept going. The Stoics would have called this amor fati, love of one's fate. To love not only the victories, but the missteps, the pauses, the moments that didn't make sense until much later. To recognize that every setback has softened something inside you, taught you something subtle, expanded your capacity for empathy. This, too, is progress, the kind that the critic can never measure because it happens quietly, beneath the surface. Sometimes, the most radical act of growth is to stop striving for a moment and simply say, "I am enough for today." Not forever, not always, just today. That simple truth has power, because when you stop demanding constant improvement, you create space for genuine change to take root. The inner critic wants you to believe that only pressure makes diamonds, but the Stoics knew that clarity comes from still water, not storms. You don't need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You can move forward softly. You can be gentle and still be strong. There comes a moment when you realize that the inner critic doesn't always have to be silenced. It can be repurposed. Its voice, after all, comes from the same mind that dreams, creates, and perseveres. What if, instead of pushing it away, you learned to work with it? Every time it says, "You can't," let that become a reminder that you once believed you couldn't before. And yet, here you are. Each accusation, each harsh whisper becomes a prompt for awareness. What is this voice protecting me from? What old story is it still trying to tell? In this way, You transform criticism into conversation. You stop fearing the voice and begin to understand it as an anxious companion, not an executioner. The Stoics understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but mastery over it. The same applies to self-doubt. You do not need to erase the critic to be free. You need only to stop mistaking its voice for the truth. When it says, "You are not ready," you can smile softly and answer, "I may not be ready, but I am willing." That small shift, from resistance to willingness, is everything. It's where movement begins again. Willingness allows you to take one step, even if it's uncertain. And each step, however small, quiets the critic more effectively than any argument ever could. There's something deeply healing about proving your critic wrong through gentle persistence rather than defiance. You don't have to shout, "I am enough," into the void. You can simply live as though you are. You can keep showing up, keep practicing, keep choosing presence over perfection. Over time, your actions speak louder than the voice ever could. You start to notice that the critic grows quieter, not because it was defeated, but because it was finally understood. It no longer needs to protect you from the pain of trying. It trusts that you can handle the discomfort of growth on your own. And so, when you feel the critic stir again, instead of bracing for battle, take a breath. Thank it for its concern. Then return your focus to what matters, the small act of trying again. That is where peace lives, not in silence, but in the gentle rhythm of persistence. The Stoics taught that true strength lies in self-command, in the ability to return to what is right, even after the mind trembles. You can tremble and still move. You can doubt and still act. You can hear the critic and still choose to be kind to yourself and to the moment you're in. With time, you begin to realize that the critic was never the villain. It was the scared part of you that didn't yet know how strong you are. There is a kind of stillness that follows after long inner struggle, not the silence of defeat, but the quiet that comes when you stop fighting yourself. You begin to notice the small things again, the rhythm of your breathing, the way sunlight spills across the floor, the gentle pulse of ordinary life moving on around you. For so long, your thoughts shouted over these moments, but now, as the noise softens, you realize how much beauty was there all along. The critic kept you chasing worth, but peace was waiting in the places you overlooked. In the pause between thoughts, in the honesty of trying again after disappointment, in the steady heartbeat that never once gave up on you. You start to see that most of what you called failure was simply living, the clumsy, human, miraculous act of becoming. You look back and see 1,000 moments where you thought you were falling apart, when in truth you were only shedding what no longer fit. Every season of doubt carried something quietly necessary, a lesson, a truth, a new softness you couldn't have learned any other way. The Stoics believed that life doesn't give or take away meaning. It offers raw material, and it's up to us to shape it. You have been shaping yours all along, even on the days that felt empty, especially on those days. And there is humility in that realization, that you don't need to conquer your mind, just learn to walk beside it. You can listen to the critic without surrendering to it. You can feel fear without labeling yourself weak. You can desire change and still be grateful for where you are. The Stoics never asked for perfection. They asked only for presence, to be here, awake to this moment, aware of your thoughts, but not owned by them. That is the quiet power of self-mastery. It's not a crown or a finish line. It's a practice, gentle, repeated, imperfect, and endlessly human. So when the inner voice returns, as it always will know how to greet it. You will meet it with calm eyes and steady breath. You will listen, but you will no longer obey. You will remember that you are the one who decides what each moment means, and that realization, that quiet choosing, is where freedom truly begins. There will always be days when the critic returns, when the noise grows louder, and you forget everything you thought you'd learned. That's okay. Growth isn't about never slipping back. It's about remembering how to return. Each time you pause, breathe, and listen without judgment, you are practicing strength. Each time you speak to yourself with patience instead of punishment, you are healing something old and invisible. This is how transformation truly happens, not through grand awakenings, but through the quiet repetition of self-kindness. The Stoics knew that a calm mind is not something you find once and keep forever. It's something you rebuild, gently, again and again. So when that familiar voice rises in your mind and begins its tired speech, you can smile softly. You can say, "I hear you, but I'm still going." You can step forward into your day, imperfect, uncertain, but present, because you have learned something the critic never knew, that peace does not depend on silence. It grows within the noise. It thrives in the middle of doubt. It lives wherever you choose to return to yourself, over and over again. In the end, that is the greatest act of courage, to meet the mind with compassion, to walk beside it with patience, and to remember that even in the moments when you feel least worthy, you are still becoming. You are still here. You are still enough. There's something quietly powerful about walking through these reflections together. And if any part of this journey has resonated with you so far, I gently invite you to pause for a moment and support this space. A simple like, a share, or a subscription helps these messages reach more people who may need them. And if a particular line or idea has touched something within you, feel free to share it in the comments. Your reflections may be exactly what someone else needs to hear. There will always be moments when you forget how far you've come. You'll catch yourself falling back into old thoughts, rehearsing the same fears, replaying the same doubts. You might even feel frustrated, wondering why, after all this time, the voice still returns. But the truth is, growth is not the absence of struggle. It's the evolution of your response to it. You no longer crumble the way you once did. You no longer believe every cruel thing your mind says. You've learned to wait, to breathe, to look at the thought instead of from it. That alone is strength, the kind of strength that doesn't shout but endures. Some days you will rise with confidence, ready to face whatever comes. Other days you will feel small, tired, unsure. Both are part of the same journey. The Stoics wrote often about this, that life is not meant to be a steady line, but a rhythm. The rise and the fall, the calm and the storm, all belong. To demand constant certainty from yourself is to misunderstand what it means to be human. Even the wise had restless nights. Even the strong doubted themselves in silence. What matters is not how often you stumble, but that you never stop returning to reason, to compassion, to yourself. Think of your life as a long conversation between the part of you that fears and the part of you that believes. The critic speaks first, perhaps more often, but the believer always has the final word. And that word doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper, "I can try again." Sometimes it sounds like silence, the quiet decision to keep going, even when no one sees the effort. Every act of gentleness toward yourself is an act of rebellion against the harshness of the world. Every time you choose patience instead of punishment, you are rewriting the story the critic tried to tell. In this way, the critic becomes your teacher. It shows you where you still ache to be accepted, where you still need understanding. It draws attention to the parts of you that crave care. And the more you meet those parts with honesty, the less power the critic holds. It begins to fade, not because it's gone, but because it's finally seen. And once you have seen it clearly, it can no longer command you. You are no longer reacting, you are responding. That is where freedom truly lives, in the space between reaction and response, between thought and action, between noise and understanding. There will come a time, perhaps sooner than you think, when the critic will speak again, and instead of fear, you will feel recognition. You'll smile and say, "I know this voice. I've walked this path before. And just like that, the voice will soften, because it will realize that it no longer controls you. It walks beside you now, quieter, smaller, almost grateful to be understood. So keep walking. Keep choosing gentleness over perfection. Keep meeting yourself, again and again, with patience. The Stoics would tell you that no one is born unshakable. They simply learn, over time, how to return to calm more quickly. You are learning the same thing. Every time you listen to your critic and still move forward, you are proving that peace is not fragile. It is steady, ancient, and waiting for you. Beneath every thought, beneath every fear, beneath every long night of self-doubt. And when you finally rest your head at the end of the day, when the world grows quiet again, you will realize that the voice that once tormented you has become something else entirely. Not an enemy, but a reminder. A reminder that even your harshest thoughts could not destroy your will to keep going. A reminder that your gentleness was always your greatest strength. And a reminder that you, even in your imperfection, are already whole. And when that truth settles into you, quietly, gently, you begin to see yourself differently. You start to realize that wholeness was never something you needed to earn or chase. It was something you carried all along, beneath the noise, beneath the pressure, beneath every moment you felt unworthy. The world may have taught you to measure your value in achievement, speed, or perfection, but your soul has always known a different language, a slower one, a kinder one, a language that speaks in small steps, honest effort, and the courage to simply continue. You begin to notice that even the parts of you you once called broken were really just places that hadn't been understood yet, places waiting for your patience, your attention, your compassion. And when you finally offer those things to yourself, without conditions, without deadlines, you discover a strange kind of strength. Not the loud, forceful strength the world celebrates, but the quiet kind that grows from self-acceptance, the kind that allows you to move through life without constantly battling yourself. Eventually, the inner critic becomes less of a storm and more of a faint echo. It still speaks, but it no longer decides. You hear it, but you also hear something else now, your wiser voice, the one that rises from your experiences, your resilience, your quiet victories. The voice that says, you've made it through worse, you can move through this too. And each time you choose that voice, the path ahead feels a little clearer, a little softer, a little more yours. In that clarity, you find something precious, the ability to walk forward without needing to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. Because you finally understand that being human means carrying doubts and hopes in the same hands, fear and courage in the same breath, uncertainty and determination in the same heartbeat. And that balance, not perfection, is what makes you beautifully, unmistakably whole. There comes a moment, often quietly and without ceremony, when you begin to see the subtle ways your inner landscape has changed. You notice that the thoughts which once overwhelmed you now feel like passing weather, appearing, gathering and fading without demanding that you engage in a storm. This shift is not sudden. It's the result of countless small decisions you've made. The decision to pause before reacting, the decision to question familiar fears, the decision to sit with discomfort instead of fleeing from it. Over time, these decisions create a kind of inner spaciousness. You begin to feel that there is more room inside you than you realized, room to breathe, room to think, room to simply be without rushing to fix or analyze everything. This spaciousness is not empty. It's where your growth quietly collects, forming a sanctuary your old self never imagined. As this space within you widens, your relationship with struggle begins to transform. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks, but like natural thresholds you are meant to cross. You start to understand that every difficult emotion, frustration, sadness, confusion, contains information. They are signals, not failures. The Stoics believed that obstacles were not interruptions to life, but essential parts of it, shaping character in ways ease never could. You begin to see this truth play out in your own journey. The moments that once felt unbearable now appear as markers of your resilience. You are able to look back with clearer eyes and recognize that each hardship forged a new capacity in you, a deeper patience, a sharper discernment, a steadier heart. And without realizing it, you have become someone who can hold complexity without collapsing. With this understanding, you become more aware of how energy moves through your days. You start noticing what drains you, what strengthens you, what ignites something alive within you. The world is loud, full of constant demands and invisible expectations, but you begin to sense that not all of them are meant for you. You learn to withdraw your energy from battles that do not matter and redirect it toward the places where your presence actually creates change. This is not avoidance, it is wisdom. It is the art of choosing what deserves your attention. As you refine this choice, you discover that your mind becomes clearer, your emotions less volatile, and your days more intentional. You stop scattering yourself in every direction and begin to move with purpose, even when your steps are slow. Eventually, you find yourself developing a different relationship with time. Instead of racing against it or fearing its passage, you start to see time as a companion, something steady, dependable, always moving with you. You realize that healing does not have a deadline, and progress does not follow a calendar. Some days you grow by miles, others by inches, but each movement counts. The world may tell you that you should always be further along, but your inner wisdom whispers that arriving is not the goal, becoming is. And becoming cannot be rushed. There is a peace that comes from allowing yourself to unfold according to your own rhythm, not the rhythm others expect of you. It is a quiet peace, but once you taste it, you never want to return to the urgency that ruled your past. And with this new relationship to time, you also begin to notice how your capacity for compassion expands, not only toward others, but toward yourself. You recognize that your mind is not a machine to be optimized, but a garden to be tended. Some days it is blooming, other days it needs pruning or rest. But it always responds to care. When you speak to yourself with patience, when you allow mistakes without shame, when you accept slow days without judgment, you create an environment where growth can actually happen. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is nourishment. It is the foundation upon which change can stand. You start to realize that discipline without compassion becomes punishment, and compassion without discipline becomes stagnation. But together, they create balance. A balance that makes life feel less like a fight and more like a collaboration with yourself. As you grow into this quieter, steadier version of yourself, something subtle begins to shift in the way you interpret your past. Memories that once felt sharp or overwhelming start to soften at the edges. You no longer see your past self as someone who failed, but as someone who was doing the best they could with the clarity they had at the time. This shift is more powerful than people realize. When you stop judging who you used to be, you release a weight you didn't know you were carrying. The shame that once clung to your old decisions begins to lift, and in its place emerges a kind of tender understanding. You start viewing your past not as a collection of mistakes, but as a series of lessons encoded in the only language life knew how to teach you then. And as this understanding deepens, you realize that the compassion you have been practicing in the present can also reach back into the past and heal what once felt untouchable. With this healing, you also develop a new sensitivity to the small moments in your everyday life, the overlooked details that are easy to dismiss when the mind is crowded with self-doubt. You start noticing the pauses between your responsibilities, the quiet minutes where nothing is demanded of you. These moments, once invisible, become spaces where you reconnect with yourself. You notice how the warmth of sunlight feels on your skin, how a deep breath settles your chest, how a silence can feel like a kind of sanctuary rather than emptiness. These aren't dramatic moments. They won't appear in anyone's highlight reel. Yet they begin to anchor you more deeply than any achievement ever has. The Stoics often wrote about mindfulness long before the word existed, about being present enough to experience the texture of life rather than simply surviving it. You begin to understand what they meant, that a life rooted in awareness, even awareness of small things, becomes richer than a life built on constant striving. As this awareness expands, you start to recognize how your environment shapes your mind. You notice which spaces leave you restless and which bring you calm. You see how certain conversations leave you heavier, while others open something bright inside you. The Stoics believed that the company you keep, whether people, habits, or thoughts, either strengthens or weakens your character. Without making any grand declarations, you begin quietly rearranging your world. You create small pockets of order in your physical space, not for perfection, but to give your mind room to breathe. You adjust the energy you share with others, choosing presence over performance, authenticity over exhaustion. And in doing so, you start to build an environment, not perfect, not flawless, but one that supports who you are becoming instead of pulling you back into who you used to be. Gradually, your internal motivation begins to transform as well. Where you once pushed yourself out of fear of falling behind, you now move because something within you desires expansion. Growth stops feeling like a punishment and begins feeling like a privilege. You start setting goals not to prove your worth, but to explore your potential. And this shift changes everything. The pressure to achieve dissolves, replaced by curiosity. You wonder what else you could learn, how else you might evolve, what strengths still lie undiscovered within you. You no longer chase improvement with desperation. You welcome it with openness. This mindset, gentle, steady, exploratory, creates progress that is far more sustainable than the frantic striving the world tries to demand of you. You are no longer running, you are unfolding. And perhaps the most unexpected change is what happens to your relationship with uncertainty. Where uncertainty once provoked fear or paralysis, it begins to feel like possibility. You stop demanding that life provide you with guarantees. Instead, you start trusting your ability to navigate the unknown. The Stoics believed that peace was found not in controlling outcomes, but in mastering your responses. As this wisdom settles into your bones, you begin to understand that uncertainty is not a threat, but a teacher. One that invites you to practice adaptability, courage, and presence. You no longer need every step of your path to be illuminated before you move. It becomes enough to see just far enough to take the next step. And in that step, a new path reveals itself. If these reflections are offering you clarity or comfort, feel free to take a moment to support the channel. A like or subscription helps these messages reach others who may need them as well. And if a particular thought has stayed with you, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your insights help create a deeper, more connected space here. Over time, you begin to notice a quiet shift in the way you carry yourself through the world. You move with a little more intention, a little more steadiness, as though something inside you has finally learned to breathe. This isn't confidence in the loud, flamboyant sense. It's the kind that grows when you stop arguing with your own humanity. You start trusting yourself in situations where you once doubted every step. You listen to your instincts with a seriousness they've long deserved. You give yourself permission to make decisions without waiting for perfect certainty. And in doing so, you discover a new kind of self-respect, not built on achievements or validation, but on the simple truth that you are capable, thoughtful, and worthy of guiding your own life. This type of confidence doesn't roar. It hums, and its quietness makes it all the more powerful. As your inner world settles, you also become more attuned to the subtle patterns of your emotional life. You notice how certain feelings rise and fall like waves, following rhythms that once felt chaotic, but now seem almost predictable. You begin to recognize the difference between emotions that need to be expressed and emotions that simply need to be observed. Some of your reactions, you realize, are echoes of old wounds, triggered not by the present moment but by unhealed fragments from long ago. But instead of pushing these emotions away, you learn to sit with them, letting them unfold at their own pace without forcing meaning or resolution. The Stoics often wrote that true strength is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to remain grounded while emotions pass through you. And now you feel that truth in your own body. You see that emotional waves lose their force when you allow them to rise without resistance. This growing emotional clarity begins to influence the way you engage with others as well. You start listening more carefully, not just to words, but to the spaces between them. You notice how people reveal themselves in tone, in hesitations, in the stories they don't know they're telling. You become more aware that everyone carries an invisible weight, often far heavier than they admit. This awareness softens you. It makes you more patient, more understanding, more deliberate in your responses. But it also gives you the wisdom to protect your own energy. You realize that empathy does not require self-sacrifice, and that compassion does not mean tolerating what harms you. You learn to hold others with kindness while holding yourself with boundaries. It is a delicate balance, but once you find it, relationships stop feeling like a battlefield and begin to feel like an exchange of humanity. As you integrate these insights, something unexpected begins to happen. You become more comfortable with silence. The loudness of the world, once a constant presence, begins to lose its grip on you. You no longer need noise to distract you from yourself, nor constant activity to validate your existence. Silence becomes a companion rather than an adversary, a space where you can hear your own thoughts clearly without fear or judgment. In that stillness, new ideas begin to form. You start noticing solutions you overlooked, connections you missed, insights that were drowned out by the noise of urgency. The Stoics believed that clarity emerges in quiet, not chaos. And now you see how silence sharpens your perception and deepens your understanding. It becomes a place of restoration rather than emptiness. With this newfound relationship to silence, your creativity also begins to flourish in ways that surprise you. You start realizing that creativity isn't just about art or expression. It's about how you solve problems, how you adapt, how you imagine what your life could look like beyond the limitations you once accepted. You begin entertaining possibilities that once seemed unrealistic or out of reach. Not because your circumstances have changed dramatically, but because your mind has expanded to allow new perspectives. You no longer approach challenges with the old belief that the world is fixed and you must fit inside it. Instead, you begin to see that much of life is malleable, shaped not just by action, but by imagination. The more you allow your mind to wander, explore, and experiment, the more you realize how many doors can open with a single shift in perception. As you continue to evolve internally, you start noticing the subtle but profound ways your relationship with effort begins to change. What once felt like a constant struggle, a daily battle to push yourself, prove yourself, or keep pace with expectations, gradually transforms into something more fluid. You realize that effort itself carries different qualities depending on its source. Effort rooted in fear is heavy and frantic. It exhausts you quickly because it's driven by the anxiety of not being enough. But effort rooted in purpose feels different. It has a calm momentum to it, a steadiness that doesn't overwhelm your nervous system. You discover that when you're aligned with your values, you don't have to force yourself forward as often. The work still requires energy, discipline, and commitment, but it doesn't feel like self-punishment anymore. It feels like a contribution to your own becoming. This shift in effort naturally affects the way you respond to setbacks. Failure stops feeling like a verdict and begins to feel more like data, a neutral piece of information about what worked and what didn't. You realize that most of your pain around failure never came from the event itself, but from the meaning you attach to it. When you stop equating mistakes with identity, you liberate yourself from an invisible cage. You no longer carry the fear that one misstep will unravel everything you've built. Instead, you learn to adjust, recalibrate, and move forward with clearer understanding. The Stoics understood this deeply, that the true loss is not in falling, but in refusing to rise again. And now, you see how resilience is formed, not in rare acts of heroism, but in the quiet willingness to keep learning from what life hands you. As your resilience grows, something else begins to take root. Your capacity to tolerate uncertainty without spiraling into panic. You start to see how often the mind tries to fill the unknown with worst-case scenarios, as if preparing for disaster could somehow protect you from it. But when you become familiar with your own inner workings, you learn that uncertainty is just a space your mind hasn't yet explored. Instead of filling it with fear, you begin filling it with curiosity. What possibilities could live here? What opportunities might emerge from what I cannot yet see? This shift doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it changes your posture toward it. You stop bracing for impact and begin opening yourself to discovery. And in that openness, you often find paths you never could have planned. At the same time, your relationship with control also begins to mature. You realize that control is not about managing every detail, predicting every outcome, or holding tightly to what you fear losing. True control is far quieter. It's the ability to steady your internal world even when the external world refuses to cooperate. It's the recognition that you can choose your responses even when you cannot choose your circumstances. This understanding allows you to release the tight grip you once had on your life. You stop trying to force things into shape and instead learn to work with what is in front of you. This creates a sense of inner freedom, a feeling that you are no longer at war with reality but in conversation with it. As your inner freedom expands, you also begin to notice how your desires transform. You no longer crave the things you once chased out of insecurity, approval, appearance, status, validation. These desires begin to fall away naturally, not because you forced yourself to abandon them, but because they no longer align with who you are becoming. Instead, you start desiring experiences that nourish your inner life. Calm mornings, meaningful conversations, deeper connections, personal clarity. You long not for recognition, but for authenticity, not for perfection, but for presence. And instead of reaching outward for fulfillment, you find yourself turning inward, discovering that much of what you once sought in the world already existed quietly within you. As your desires shift toward what is real and nourishing, you begin to sense a new kind of spaciousness opening inside you. An internal quiet that is not empty, but filled with possibility. You notice that the more you release your grip on old identities and outdated expectations, the more room you create for authentic growth. You start to realize that much of your inner tension came from trying to live a life that was too small for who you were becoming. Now, as you outgrow those constraints, you begin to feel the subtle stretch of personal expansion. It's not explosive or dramatic. It's gentle, like a dawn slowly brightening a familiar room. You no longer feel the need to shrink yourself to fit old patterns. Instead, you rise to meet a version of yourself that once felt distant, someone grounded, self-aware, and quietly confident in their own unfolding. As you settle into this deeper version of yourself, your perception of other people starts to shift. You begin to see beyond surface behaviors, recognizing that everyone is navigating their own internal terrain. Instead of reacting to others' moods, criticisms, or defensiveness, you notice the pain or fear that might lie beneath their actions. This doesn't mean you excuse their behavior, but it allows you to respond from a wiser place. You begin offering empathy where you once offered defense, and boundaries where you once offered silence. You start understanding that kindness and self-protection are not opposites, but companions. The more clearly you see yourself, the more clearly you see others, not as threats to guard against, but as humans trying, failing, hoping, and healing in their own complicated ways. With this broadened sense of empathy, you also begin to re-evaluate the role of solitude in your life. Where solitude once felt like isolation or emptiness, it now appears as a sanctuary, an environment where your inner voice is easiest to hear. You begin to understand that solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of clarity. In time alone, you recalibrate. You gather the pieces of yourself that were scattered throughout the day. You reconnect with your priorities, your values, and your deeper intentions. This quiet time becomes less of an escape and more of a returning to the self that often gets drowned in the noise of expectations. The Stoics valued solitude as a means of self-governance, and now you understand why. In solitude, you meet the truest version of yourself, not the one shaped by circumstance, but the one shaped by reflection. As your relationship with solitude deepens, you begin noticing how your creativity intertwines with introspection. Ideas that once felt forced now arise naturally, like gentle sparks in the stillness. You find yourself more able to imagine new possibilities, to think beyond limitations, to design your life with intention rather than habit. Creativity becomes not a task, but a natural expression of your inner state. You realize that creativity is not limited to art or writing. It influences the way you solve problems, build relationships, and envision your future. By giving your mind space to breathe, you've unlocked a well of insight that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface. And in that insight, you start to see the horizons of your life stretch farther than you ever thought possible. At the same time, your understanding of progress becomes more nuanced. You stop expecting to feel motivated all the time, recognizing that discipline is what carries you through the quieter phases. You stop believing that growth must always be visible, remembering that much of it happens in places no one else can see. You begin to appreciate the slow, persistent work that happens beneath the surface, moments of reflection, difficult conversations with yourself, the subtle rewiring of old habits. This internal work rarely receives applause, but it forms the foundation of lasting change. You start honoring the days where you simply show up, even without enthusiasm. You recognize that perseverance is less about force and more about consistency, a steady willingness to keep moving in the direction of your becoming, even when the path feels uncertain. As you continue along this quiet path of self-development, you begin to understand something subtle but profound about emotional endurance. You realize that much of your suffering never came from the emotions themselves, but from the way you resisted them, tightening your chest, tensing your mind, bracing against feelings you believed you were not supposed to have. Now, as you learn to soften your resistance, you discover that emotions move through you more freely. Fear loses its sharpness when you stop treating it as a flaw. Sadness becomes a signal rather than a collapse. Anger becomes information rather than a threat. You start to notice how feelings change shape when met with acceptance instead of judgment. They loosen, they expand, they complete their cycle and release their grip. And in that release, you find a strength that does not crumble beneath emotion, but creates space for it. A strength rooted not in suppression, but in understanding. This growing emotional intelligence gradually helps you notice patterns that were once invisible to you. You start recognizing the subtle cues your mind gives when you're drifting into old narratives, the tightening of your shoulders, the quickening of your thoughts, the familiar pull of self-criticism or worry. Instead of falling into these patterns unconsciously, you begin catching them mid-formation. You pause, you breathe, you choose differently. This ability to interrupt your own autopilot becomes one of your most powerful tools. It marks the moment where old wounds stop dictating new choices, where past experiences no longer hold authority over present behaviors. It is in these small, almost imperceptible shifts that transformation takes place, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet redirection of your inner dialogue. With this heightened awareness, you begin to understand that healing and growth are not linear journeys, but layered ones. Some lessons return again and again, not because you failed to learn them the first time, but because you are ready to understand them more deeply. You stop viewing repetition as a setback and begin seeing it as refinement. Each time a familiar challenge reappears, you approach it from a slightly different vantage point, armed with new insights, new patience, and new strength. You begin to understand that mastery is not achieved through force, but through repeated engagement with what challenges you. And slowly, the areas of your life that once felt sharp, heavy, or confusing begin to soften under the weight of your ongoing attention. As your inner clarity strengthens, you also deepen your relationship with intention. You begin realizing that life feels different when you move with purpose rather than momentum. You stop rushing into decisions simply to escape discomfort or uncertainty, and instead give yourself permission to choose slowly, deliberately, with awareness. You begin asking yourself questions you once avoided. What do I truly value? What feels aligned? What quietly drains me? And what quietly restores me? These questions serve as a compass, pointing you toward choices that support your growth rather than sabotage it. Over time, your life becomes less reactive and more intentional, not shaped by pressure or fear, but by a grounded understanding of who you are becoming. As intention deepens, you start to see time in a more compassionate light. You realize that rushing through life creates the illusion of progress while quietly eroding your presence. You learn to trust slow mornings, quiet evenings, moments of rest that once filled you with guilt. You understand that time given to reflection is not wasted. Time given to stillness is not laziness. Time spent reconnecting with yourself is not indulgent. Instead, it is the foundation for every meaningful step you will take. You begin to move through your days with a calmer rhythm, recognizing that each moment, whether productive or peaceful, contributes something essential to your unfolding. You stop demanding that every hour prove its worth and start allowing each hour to simply be what it is. As you grow more at ease with the natural rhythm of time, you begin to develop a clearer sensitivity to your own internal cycles, moments of expansion, moments of contraction, and the spaces in between where you're neither moving forward nor backward, but simply gathering strength. You start to notice how your energy pulses throughout the day, rising in certain situations, dimming in others. Instead of forcing yourself to operate at a constant intensity, you learn to work with these rhythms rather than against them. On days when your energy is bright and focused, you move into your goals with clarity. On days when the mind feels heavy or restless, you shift toward gentler tasks that support your well-being. This cooperation with your own inner seasons creates a sense of harmony you may not have realized was possible. You begin understanding that honoring your natural cycles is not a sign of weakness, but an act of alignment, a way of living that works with your humanity instead of ignoring it. As alignment deepens, something remarkable happens. You start to trust your inner voice more than the noise around you. You notice that external opinions, which once held so much weight, begin to lose their power. The judgments you once feared, the expectations you once bent yourself to meet, the comparisons that once ate away at your peace, they begin to fade like distant echoes. Instead, you tune into a quieter wisdom within yourself, one that speaks not in demands, but in gentle nudges. This inner voice doesn't shout to be heard. It just waits for you to slow down enough to listen. You realize that this voice has always been there, guiding you softly beneath the turbulence of your thoughts. And the more you lean into it, the more confident you become in decisions that once felt frightening. Not because you know exactly where they lead, but because the direction feels honest. This growing trust in yourself reshapes your relationship with your goals. You begin to recognize that goals are not destinations to obsess over, but directions that help you grow into your potential. Instead of chasing outcomes with urgency, you start valuing the process of becoming someone capable of fulfilling those goals. You realize that the true reward lies not in the achievement itself, but in the person you evolve into while pursuing it. Obstacles no longer feel like interruptions. They feel like invitations to develop the traits you've always admired in others: patience, perseverance, adaptability, grace. You learn to hold your aspirations with both seriousness and softness, understanding that growth happens best when you remain dedicated but not desperate. This approach frees you from the pressure of perfection and anchors you in a deeper sense of purpose. As you shift your focus from outcomes to evolution, your sense of identity becomes more fluid and expansive. You stop defining yourself by your mistakes or your past roles, and instead see yourself as a continually unfolding story. You recognize that identity is not fixed. It is a living thing, shaped by the choices you make, the values you strengthen, and the fears you've learned to walk through. This fluidity brings relief. It releases you from the need to cling to old labels or outdated narratives. You no longer feel confined by who you were last year, or even last week. You understand that reinvention doesn't require a dramatic transformation. It can happen quietly, through small shifts in behavior, intention, or belief. And as you embrace this freedom, you begin meeting yourself with a curiosity that replaces judgment with possibility. With this new sense of possibility comes a deeper understanding of boundaries, not as barriers to connection, but as bridges to healthier relationships. You become more attuned to the subtleties of emotional exchange, when someone's needs begin to overshadow your own, when your presence becomes a place for others to unload rather than connect, when your kindness drifts into overextension. Instead of allowing these patterns to drain you, you start to recognize them early and respond with clarity. You learn to say no without guilt, to step back without resentment, and to protect your emotional space without shutting others out. These boundaries create a stable foundation from which genuine connection can grow, connections rooted not in obligation or fear, but in mutual respect and authenticity. And in these healthier relationships, you find the kind of support that nourishes rather than depletes you. As your understanding of boundaries strengthens, you begin to experience a new form of emotional stability, one that feels less like guarding yourself and more like honoring yourself. You start to sense, almost instinctively, when your attention is being pulled in directions that don't align with your values. The conversations that drain you become easier to recognize, and the environments that dim your internal clarity become easier to leave. This awareness doesn't make you distant, it makes you discerning. You begin realizing that protecting your energy is just as important as protecting your time. And slowly, the people who remain in your life are those who respect your space, appreciate your honesty, and uplift your spirit. These relationships feel lighter, healthier, and more rooted in truth. They provide a sense of safety, not because they are perfect, but because they allow you to remain whole in your presence. As stability takes root, your perception of success also begins to shift. You realize that much of society's definition of success is built on comparison, an endless game of being better, faster, richer, more visible. You see how exhausting that chase becomes when your self-worth is tied to external milestones. Slowly, you begin redefining success in a way that feels intimate and personal. Success becomes waking up with clarity instead of dread. It becomes feeling proud of small improvements others may never notice. It becomes the ability to walk away from what harms you, even when staying would be easier. It becomes choosing rest without guilt, choosing growth without pressure, choosing yourself without apology. This quieter version of success doesn't scream for attention, but its impact reverberates through every part of your life. With this redefined sense of success, you also gain a healthier relationship with rest. Instead of seeing rest as a pause from life, you begin to see it as part of life, a necessary cycle that restores your vitality, creativity, and emotional balance. You stop pushing yourself past your limits to meet artificial expectations. You start listening to the signals your body and mind have always given you, signals you once ignored in the pursuit of productivity. Rest becomes not just sleep or downtime, but a conscious act of renewal, a walk, a moment of stillness, a breath that resets your nervous system. You learn that resting intentionally doesn't diminish your drive, it sharpens it. It turns your efforts from frantic to focused. And in that focus, you feel more capable, more grounded, more connected to the path you are walking. As you integrate rest into your life with greater intention, your relationship with your own inner narrative deepens. You begin noticing the tone you use when speaking to yourself, the subtle judgments, the quiet doubts, the lingering fears that shape your self-perception. Instead of letting these inner voices run unchecked, you start to question them with gentleness. You ask yourself whether the stories you repeat are true or simply familiar. You begin replacing harsh self-talk with compassionate truth, not flattery, not delusion, but honest kindness. Over time, this shift transforms the way you see your own reflection, both literally and metaphorically. You start recognizing the strength in your endurance, the beauty in your resilience, and the worthiness that has always existed beneath your self-doubt. You no longer speak to yourself as an adversary, but as an ally. With a kinder inner voice guiding you, your sense of direction becomes more intuitive. You stop relying solely on logic or external advice to tell you what you should do, and begin trusting the signals that arise from within. Intuition, once dismissed as vague or unreliable, starts revealing itself as one of your most powerful sources of wisdom. It's the quiet feeling that tells you when something is off, even if everything looks right on paper. It's the subtle pull toward opportunities that may not make sense to others, but resonate deeply with your inner truth. It's the inner whisper that nudges you forward when fear tries to hold you back. As you learn to honor this intuition, your decisions become more aligned, your path more authentic, and your life more reflective of the person you are becoming. If this journey is resonating with you, you're welcome to like, share, or subscribe. And if a certain part of this narrative has touched your heart, feel free to add your reflection in the comments. As you deepen your trust in intuition, you begin to notice a shift in what you choose to pursue and what you allow to fade from your life. You stop forcing yourself toward paths that no longer feel aligned, even if they once held importance or admiration. Instead, you find yourself gravitating toward pursuits that nourish your sense of meaning, even if they appear modest, quiet, or unconventional. This shift doesn't happen abruptly. It unfolds gradually, in small decisions that accumulate into a larger transformation. A conversation you no longer entertain, a workload you no longer accept, a routine you gently restructure to better serve your mental and emotional state. In these subtle changes, you realize that alignment is not a single decision, but a series of constant recalibrations, adjustments guided by who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. As your choices become more aligned, your relationship with uncertainty continues to evolve. You begin to understand that the unknown is not a void, but a landscape waiting to be explored. You stop demanding guarantees before taking a step and instead begin trusting your ability to adapt along the way. This trust doesn't erase fear, but it softens its grip. You learn to walk forward with both courage and caution, acknowledging that fear often signals the beginning of growth. The Stoics knew that the mind tends to exaggerate what is unfamiliar, turning possibilities into threats. Now you see how your own mind once did the same, but instead of shrinking back, you start leaning into the edge of the unknown, curious about what clarity might emerge when you give yourself permission to move, even without perfect certainty. In this space, uncertainty becomes less of an enemy and more of an invitation, a call to experience life with openness rather than resistance. As openness grows within you, you begin developing a renewed sense of gratitude, not the performative kind, but a genuine appreciation for the subtle, easily overlooked blessings that weave through your everyday experience. You start noticing the warmth of small comforts, the steadiness of your breath, the grace of ordinary mornings, the support of people who quietly show up for you, the progress you make in private that no one else sees. Gratitude becomes less about listing what you're thankful for and more about recognizing the richness of the present moment. It becomes an anchor, grounding you in the reality that even on difficult days, something meaningful remains, something steady, something gentle, something worth holding on to. This gratitude isn't loud or flashy, it's quiet and enduring, a soft glow within you that brings balance to the weight of life's challenges. With gratitude as a companion, you also find that your capacity for patience expands in ways you didn't expect. You stop demanding immediate results from yourself, recognizing that meaningful growth rarely follows a linear timeline. You understand that change often happens beneath the surface, invisible to the eye but alive in your habits, your reactions, your thoughts, and your emotional patterns. Patience becomes not an act of waiting, but an act of trusting. Trusting the process, trusting your efforts, trusting the small steps that accumulate into transformation. Over time, you find that patience dissolves frustration, replacing it with a calm persistence that carries you forward without panic. You no longer rush toward the future to escape the present. Instead, you stand grounded in the moment, knowing that each day builds upon the last in its own quiet way. As patience settles deeper into your mindset, your understanding of resilience transforms as well. You begin to see resilience not as the ability to endure without faltering, but as the capacity to recover with wisdom. You learn that it's okay to break down, to pause, to feel overwhelmed. None of these moments erase your strength. If anything, they deepen it. Each time you rise from a difficult experience, you bring back insights that shape the next chapter of your life. You realize that resilience is not forged in ease, but in the courage to return to yourself after every storm. It's not the absence of struggle, but the presence of inner loyalty, the unwavering commitment to keep walking toward your own well-being, even when the path feels heavy. And this understanding gives you a new sense of peace, the peace of knowing that you are capable not because you never fall, but because you always find your way back. As resilience deepens, you start to experience a profound shift in how you relate to your own imperfections. Instead of treating them as flaws to hide or fix, you begin to see them as reminders of your humanity, evidence that you are living, learning, adapting, and growing. You start noticing that your imperfections often hold the very qualities that make you relatable, compassionate, and wise. The parts of you that once caused embarrassment or frustration now become places of understanding. You realize that perfection was never the goal, authenticity was. And with authenticity comes a kind of freedom that perfection could never offer. You begin to show up in your life without the constant fear of being exposed, because you no longer see your vulnerabilities as something to conceal. They become part of your truth, woven into the fabric of your identity with grace rather than shame. As this acceptance grows, your sense of inner peace becomes more grounded and less dependent on circumstances. You stop measuring your worth by what goes right or wrong in a given day and begin tuning into something more stable: your values, your intentions, your effort, your presence. You realize that peace isn't something you acquire when everything aligns. It's something you cultivate within, regardless of what unfolds outside. This inner peace doesn't mean the absence of difficulty. It means you no longer crumble when difficulty arrives. You begin to meet challenges with a steadier breath, a clearer mind, and a quieter heart. The storms still come, but your roots grow deeper. And in that rootedness, you start experiencing moments of clarity in situations that once overwhelmed you. You see options where you once saw barriers, and you find openings where you once felt trapped. As clarity grows, You also develop a richer understanding of purpose, not as a single, grand mission, but as a way of moving through life. You realize that purpose can be found in subtle acts, choosing kindness when irritation is easier, practicing patience in moments of stress, offering compassion to yourself when you fall short. Purpose becomes less about achieving something impressive and more about aligning your behavior with the kind of person you want to be. You start recognizing that meaning is not found in extraordinary achievements, but in the consistency of your choices. Each day becomes a canvas for living with intention, and even the smallest actions begin to carry weight. You understand that purpose is not discovered once, it is cultivated continuously through attention, reflection, and practice. As your purpose becomes clearer, you find a deeper sense of direction, not in the form of rigid plans, but in the form of inner guidance. You realize that you don't need to know the entire path ahead to move forward. You simply need to know the next honest step. And when you take that step, the next one reveals itself. This understanding dissolves much of the anxiety that once accompanied your decisions. You stop trying to control the future and begin trusting your ability to respond to whatever comes. This trust becomes a steady companion, a quiet reassurance that even when the road twists unexpectedly, you can adapt. You are no longer navigating life with fear as your compass. You are navigating with clarity, patience, and a grounded sense of self. And so, as you look at the long trail behind you, the doubts you've walked through, the fears you've softened, the resilience you've built, you begin to understand something profound. You were not shaped by a single moment of triumph, but by thousands of small choices to keep going. Choices to breathe through discomfort, to question old narratives, to honor your needs, to trust your intuition, to be kinder to yourself than you were the day before. This journey has not made you perfect. It has made you whole. And in that wholeness, you discover the quiet truth the Stoics carried through their lives, that strength is not found in domination, but in self-mastery. Not in certainty, but in presence. Not in being untouched by life, but in being shaped by it with intention and grace. You move forward now with a steadier heart, knowing that you carry within you all the tools you need to navigate whatever paths unfold. Your journey is not about becoming someone different, but about returning to the person you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the expectations. A person capable of clarity, compassion, resilience, and profound inner strength. And as you step forward, you carry with you the understanding that growth is not the destination. It is the way you walk, with awareness, with courage, with patience, and always with the quiet knowing that even in your imperfection, you are and always have been enough.